sit on the front row if you want to learn anything. So, but your guys are good. No worries. You'll get a bunch out of this. So. That's right. You are in the front row. Hey, I just introduced myself real quickly. I'm Ryan Schmidt. I'm with BDO, Business Development Director for them. Been with BDO about 2 years, and one of the sponsors of this event. Just great to be a part of it, and very worthwhile. And I had to wait a little bit, so the sooner I introduce Jeff, the sooner I get to eat my nachos. So there you go. Jeff Lose is with CapM Advisors. He's been with them just a few years now. Prior to CapM Advisor, he was with D.A. Davidson out of Portland. Has nearly 20 years of experience in M&A type transactions, you name it, from domestic to international, and over 100 deals. So I think this is probably the most important session, right? It's you thinking about selling your business. This is the most critical thing. I think you'll get a great value about it. And I think Jeff is kind of turning this more into a discussion as we go forward. But he's got plenty of material to talk to. But we encourage you all to participate. So Jeff is a University of Utah graduate in their finance department. Just welcome Jeff. Thanks, Jeff.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, and hopefully everyone got some lunch. If you didn't get lunch, the food trucks are right out there for a little while longer. So, can you guys hear me okay if I just talk like this? Okay. So I'll keep the mic because I think they're recording it, but I won't worry about the volume here. So, but excited to be here. I'm excited to share a few things. I've got a few slides here just to give me some credibility, just so you can understand what I do. And just lend some credibility to what I'm going to share with you today. But before I jump in, I'd love a show of hands as to how many people have gone through some sort of transaction, some sale transaction. Okay, a good chunk. Okay, excellent. And so, as you probably know, the people who raise hands, and maybe this might be news for you, every deal is a little bit different, and every deal could have gone better. And so we're going to talk a little bit about things that, we could have done in advance to have a more streamlined and maybe more successful transaction. So that's what I want to focus on today. So I'm going to hit a little bit of my background, a little bit of the trends in the market, so you can kind of see how, how things are going. You probably read the news that the world is about to maybe end again and have another recession, but I'm here to tell you that's likely not the case either. I think good companies, prepared companies, always sell for strong, or have strong outcomes. So I want to kind of reinforce that. But wanted to start by just telling you a little bit about who CapM is. So we're a M&A advisory firm with a big focus on strategy. So we like to work with our clients both early on, way before a transaction, and post-transaction to help them execute on specific business objectives. And those business objectives may include exiting for a very large sum of money, but it also may include growth strategies that involve acquisition-related growth. And so we are involved in all of those. So we've done as a firm $54 billion of transaction volume, which represents about 225 transactions. We do a lot of cross-border deals, but 35+% of our deals are cross-border, where we have clients internationally. So that is a big component of what we do. And then we focus really on 4 key areas that we've developed expertise in over a number of different transactions, 225 plus transactions. And so key areas for us are consumer, healthcare, technology, industrial, and we also have expertise in areas outside of that because we're very relationship focused. And so we try to develop those relationships over time and get smarter and smarter with our clients. This is kind of the sum total of what we do. So we do a lot, as you can see, a lot on the strategic advisory side, getting people ready for shareholder value creation on the right. So we're in there, we roll up our sleeves, and we help with preparation from a KPI standpoint, financials, strategy, helping business owners understand what their objectives really are, because that may be a little bit clouded for people too. business owners might not know, am I going to give it to my kids? Am I going to sell it? You know, what have you. So it can be very different for different owners. So we try to help them think through that in advance of a transaction. Because if you don't have the right strategy, kind of what you don't know the kind of litmus test from a success factor perspective. So those are things. So, and then on the transaction side, we do anything from kind of partial to full liquidation, acquisition-related growth, you know, a lot of support for deals that are in process. So maybe you find yourself over your skis sometimes and trying to get a deal done. We plug into those situations and help people navigate towards a close. So we do a lot of that stuff. These are some of the deals we've done recently. These are just recent deals over the past 12, 18 months. And then, so you might know some of those, but these are deals that we've done in Utah. And so you might know these companies a little bit better. You know, we worked with Stoneground. We recently found them a new owner, all the way to working with companies like 1-800-CONTACTS, which is a great Utah success story. And a lot of others. So we've worked with a lot of Utah companies, and we really love working with Utah companies. I'm based here. We have a team here, and then we also have a team in New York. And together we cover kind of the broader country in those 4 key verticals I mentioned. Okay, so enough about us and enough about me. So this is all I've ever done. This is all I know. And so I can talk about this topic for more than the whatever time they're giving me. So I'm going to try to move it forward and give you some context, but I love questions. I'm a pretty easy to approach person, and so feel free to shout out questions, even if I have my back turned to you and I'm looking at the slide. So fair game. Anyone can ask questions. So this is the discussion outline. I'd like to talk about just the current trends in M&A. And then I'll talk about kind of what drives value in M&A, and then we're going to kind of dig in a little bit deeper, talk about some more stories from the trenches on deals that we've done and things that could have gone better had people done some preparation. So let's kind of go to this. And this is a kind of a very high-level picture. This is the key determinant of M&A activity. There are really 2 components. One is kind of the availability of capital. The other is a buyer's willingness to sell or acquire. And that is the formula. You know, we all like formulas, a little bit of math here. And very simplistically, that's what drives M&A value. When all these things are firing on all cylinders, you have a very good M&A environment. When things are a little bit more choppy, then you're going to have a little bit fewer deals get done. And so those are key drivers. So if you think about when to do deals, it's when it's an optimal kind of situation in both of those camps. And I've done some check marks and little tildes here to show kind of where we are currently in the market. You know, lots of equity out there. There's tons of capital. So if you want to do a deal and that's what you're thinking about, you know, it's good time to do that. Cash on balance sheets of public companies, very high. Still, you know, a good time to sell to a strategic buyer, a company. Availability of debt is getting a little bit choppier. Interest rates are rising, as we all know, but just the availability, especially for larger transactions, it's getting a little bit harder. It's not impossible, but it's getting challenging. So that's something to bear in mind. It's much worse today than it was 90 days ago. You know, just from that perspective, it can change pretty quickly. And then on the willingness to sell, you know, it's all about the company itself. You know, how's the company doing? You know, what are they trying to achieve? You know, what are their options? You know, could they sell a portion? Are they trying to sell because one shareholder wants out? Well, there are things that can be done that maybe isn't a full sale of the company. So are there a lot of options? And, you know, if there aren't a lot of options, that can be a driver to do more deals. But if there are a lot of options, you know, it isn't a true determinant of people's willingness to sell. But then also flexibility. And when I say flexibility, I mean the flexibility of the owner. Are they willing to do a deal? You know, people who stand resolute on their terms and their terms aren't tied to market conditions, they often don't get deals done because they're not willing to negotiate. You know, the value of a company is very much tied to what a willing buyer is willing to pay. And so it's relative. And so flexibility is really important. And I would say today, people are less flexible because we've come off a period of very high valuations for a long time. And we'll talk about that next, and a lot of deal volume. So people kind of still want really high values, whereas the availability of capital is a little bit worse. But valuation is also relative to the company itself. So I want to put that. This is a trend of just deals in the U.S., number of deals. So this isn't dollar value. And if you kind of look at over the last 5 years here, what the past 5 years and the current year, where deals have gone. So you can see that the 2020 year was the COVID year, and that the first part of that year, deals stopped. It really was a very hard time to get deals done. Just logistically was very hard. Not for lack of wanting to do a deal, but just it was hard to get deals done. But the prior years were very, very robust years. And if I went back further, you would see a steady increase over the prior 5 years post the Great Recession. And so it was a nice, strong M&A market for a long time with some hiccups here and there along the way, but it's been relatively robust. And so that 2019 number was a very strong number. In 2021, you look at 21,000 deals in the US get done, and there were two things that really drove that. One was pent-up demand from COVID, spilling into 21, and then, I don't know if you remember this, but they were gonna raise taxes. And I haven't seen that really yet, but that's gonna happen. And so a lot of people got scared and wanted to sell their business last year in advance of that. And so that drove a lot of volume last year. But if you look at this year, and this bar on the right, the lighter blue, that's the year to date through the end of August. That's the kind of volume. So kind of relative every year. This year, we're above where we were in 2019. So it's a strong deal environment right now, very strong. And it's still bigger than 18 and 17, and quite a bit bigger than 2020, but that's kind of a harder year to comp against. But we're very much down versus last year, but that's okay. It still shows that there's quite a bit of activity. And so if we go on an annualized basis, we're gonna hit about 18,600 deals for the year. That's a very strong year and better than what we did in 2019. So if people are saying, oh, it's not a great year to do deals, well, the data is showing a little bit otherwise. Okay? And then this is a valuation. This is a big no-no for me, showing valuations just generically. But I wanted to show this as kind of illustratively. So this is a data source that is self-reported valuations by private equity funds kind of in the lower middle market. So this is all industries throughout the US, only private equity deals. And they report this data to an aggregator. And it shows, if you look here at the top, this first kind of row is deals between 10 to 25 million in enterprise value. Think of purchase price. And then it goes all the way down to the bucket of 100 to 250 million in enterprise value, so the purchase price. And you can see, in aggregate, in this total column, the larger you get, you tend to get a premium. So bigger companies trade for larger valuations. That's just kind of a fairly known quantity. But what is interesting, if you look at the aggregate, the total along the x-axis here, you've got the gentle tick up in valuations over the last several years, and culminating in last year, multiples at very elevated levels. Partially that could be offset because of COVID performance, but even year to date, we're at 7.4 times enterprise value to EBITDA. So this is enterprise value to EBITDA multiples, and that's a very strong relative valuation. Now, is your company going to sell for 7.4 times EBITDA? No. Yeah, I don't know. Every company is going to trade for a different valuation, right? And some companies are valued more on revenue and less on EBITDA. I'm sharing this just to show you that valuations have upticked over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and it's a good time to explore a potential sale because people are willing to pay elevated prices. And so, any questions on this data? Yeah.
Why do you think that there's a trend in upward valuations
Uh,
over the last 5 years?
Yeah, part of it is a cost of capital. It's a little bit of a lower cost of capital environment, and that's allowing people to drive to higher valuations. So cost of debt has been very low for very long, and people start putting some equity to work on their balance sheets, and they can borrow some money too, and it's just allowed them to pay a little bit higher prices. Competition for good deals is quite robust. You think of the different types of buyers for a business. There's just more competition for good deals. So those are a couple.
Do you see any of these done in pure cash?
Not right now. Debt is so cheap. But in my history, have I seen deals done for cash? Absolutely. It's during the Great Recession, I saw multiple deals in a row get done all equity, and then they would recapitalize once the debt markets came back. But yeah, we just closed a transaction 2 weeks ago, and the buyer was a strategic buyer. They paid all cash. So it happens in this environment, generally more for strategic buyers, meaning companies, versus financial buyers, private equity funds. Yeah, good question. Does that address? Yep. Okay. Any other questions on the data? Excellent. Okay, shout them out if you do have questions. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the whole reason we're here is, what can you do to drive value? And I like to show this type of illustration. There are two components to driving value. One, and it's very important, more important than most people realize, is the preparation, that goes into a deal. The deal itself on the right here, that is, if you do it right, it's a full, process, and it can be a very narrow process where you're talking to a few people, or it can be a very broad process where you're talking to 100+ potential buyers. But that is something on its own. So we're not going to focus on that, and that's what I do. So I try to help companies through a transaction process to drive, an outcome. If they're trying to go for top dollar or they're trying to find a certain kind of partner. That's what we try to align our objectives with our clients on and kind of execute on that. But I want to focus more in this discussion on the left, preparation. And, companies just in general are largely unprepared for a transaction. Rule of thumb. We work with a lot of privately owned companies, family-owned companies, and even some, financial, private equity-owned companies are not entirely prepared for a transaction. And that can happen for a couple different reasons. A buyer may come out of the woodwork and, put an offer in for your company unsolicitedly, and you might not be ready for it, right? So there are certain things you need to kind of take in mind that you're not always going to be able to be prepared, but it does help you in a number of different ways to be along that road. And so I'm going to talk about that. But key areas that owners deprioritize when thinking about a transaction is thinking about a transaction. And so owners sometimes just up and decide, I do want to sell my company, even though the last 10 years have been, no, I'm never going to sell this company. It's always going to be in the family. And that happens to us all the time. And we're ready to help in those situations. But when that happens, there are certain things that you kind of look for. Number one, succession planning. No one wants to think about being replaced in that environment, and you need to think about it. If the owner wants to retire post a transaction, you should have been thinking about that and have a team in place to take over for you, because the buyer doesn't know your business as well as you do, right? And they underinvest on the financial side. They don't have the right systems. They don't have a good team. That is something we see all the time. The formal agreements, let's say you're renting a building from a relative, and you have no lease agreement, or you have some key people that know a lot about your business, and you have no non-compete, non-solicit, assignment of IP agreements in place. Nothing. And that's a big red flag and very hard in that circumstance. So those formal agreements that should be in place, that would be in place at companies like, Coke and Pepsi or Microsoft aren't in place in private companies, and can be a bit of an obstacle. And then it's hard to explain to people how to grow. That growth story is very hard for most companies to articulate. Strangely, you implicitly know how to grow your businesses. How many are kind of CFOs in this room? Okay. You know how your business model works, right? you know how it grows, how you make money, how you make more money. But to articulate the drivers of that can be really hard for people. So I would say those are some key areas that people just don't think about when they're thinking about selling their business, and it would be of great value to think about. So this is kind of the lead in to the next section, and there's a lot of notes on this. And if anyone would like a copy of this, feel free to come find me after. I'm happy to send you this. But on the left, on your left here, you've got all the things that would be good to focus on. On the right, these are things that you want to avoid, even though it may feel like you should be doing them right now. I'm not saying kind of avoid them forever, just avoid them as you're preparing for a deal. But, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but just to pick on a few of, ones to think about is, tracking KPIs, understanding what are those levers in your business is really important. Having a plan, if you're very concentrated on a customer basis, having a plan to diversify, that is something, when a company comes to me and they have a 90% customer, that's a real issue. It impacts value, and if you have no real plan in place to diversify that can make it hard to sell. Not impossible. I sold a company called Yo Cream. They make frozen yogurt. Their top 3 customers were very, very concentrated, but one of their top customers was Costco. They do all the frozen yogurt in Costco, in those little food service. And it's a big account for them. And it was hard when we sold it to Danone. They really looked at that, and they had a relationship with Costco, so they were able to get over it because of the existing relationship. But often, that can be an impediment. So having that customer diversification strategy in place makes sense. Surround yourself with good people, both advisors and management team. So make sure, you may be a good CFO, you may be a good financial kind of operator, but, make sure you have everyone else on your team that's top quality. And if they're not, try to figure out a way to up-tier everyone. Train them, get someone new. That helps you prepare. It helps you do your job. Things to avoid, don't delay. Hey, we're going to sell the business next year. Let's not invest in this or that. Don't delay capital investments for a transaction. You'll get penalized. I sold a business where they had invested the year before $30 million of CapEx. A lot. Brand new kind of plant expansion, tripled their capacity. And the multiple reflected that when we sold it. It was a massive multiple, an industry record in that industry. It was in kind of a packaged food company. But it's because they had enabled the growth beforehand. So don't avoid that, even though technically you're going to leave some money on the table. But it's a great thing to do in advance. And there are a few others here, but there are things you want to avoid, and I've listed them. There are things you want to focus on.
Jeff, I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
Back on the word of focus as well as what to avoid, how often are you seeing a lot of sell-side diligence and quality of earnings or something like that done prior to the deal get done? And how is that impacting the multiple, or at least from the sellers? Hey, how is that affecting their vision or their, I think I'm worth this, but now I really know I'm probably worth more this, or this is my earnings, this is my EBITDA.
That's a perfect question for kind of this. And so those are kind of key areas you want to think about. And QOVs and what are called sell-side QOVs, you want to do quality of earnings, QOV. It really just depends on a few things on when and why to do them. If it's a smaller business and the cost of doing a quality of earnings isn't justifiable, I understand. But I would say in most cases, you're going to gain more from doing it than the cost you're going to put into it. Because you're going to discover things in that process that the buyer would have discovered and dinged you on. In a sale process when you have very minimal leverage, maybe after you've signed a letter of intent and you're kind of trying to close a deal, they found something that you should have found early on in your quality of earnings, right? So we'll talk a lot about that. Yeah.
Does structure matter? Like if you're an LLC versus a C corp, or if you're going from a family business and trying to sell it, do you want to go through that process?
Not necessarily. So we sell C corps, we sell S corps all the time, and the transaction structure matters more than the enterprise structure. You know, if it's an MLP or some of these more a REIT, they can be a little bit challenging, but there aren't. I can tell you, and I don't see any lawyers, but there are some great lawyers in Utah that know how to structure a deal, and they work just solely on deals, and they know how to kind of navigate some of that. And so it's about getting the right team around you at that point. But if you're setting up a new entity, you know, I would say do whatever's most efficient for your business, and a transaction can be done around it. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions on the couple slides ago? So that slide that had all the words on it, we're going to go into a lot of depth here in this section. And, you know, appreciate all the questions. So if any of these you want to drill deeper into, just let me know. But these are kind of, you know, 3 things that you can do, you know, starting today to get ready for a transaction. One is just getting organized. It may sound silly. It may sound like a waste of time, but it is, you know, incredibly valuable to do over time as opposed to over a weekend during a deal. Promise you. And you'll thank me later. And if you want to thank me later, you know, come thank me. But financial fitness is really a clever way of saying, get your books in order. You just do some of the basics. And so we'll talk about each one of these. And then preparing your team, that's both the management team, kind of the leadership team, and also your team of advisors around you, who's going to support you, both the owner and the management team. Often when we're at the later stages of a deal, you know, it gets rather emotional with a business owner, especially if it's a family-owned business that they've owned for, you know, 3 generations, and they're the 3rd generations. Am I doing the right thing about selling the business? And they just need someone's opinion, and they need someone's trusted opinion. And me being involved in the whole process, and they can turn to us, an advisor, and help them kind of think through the pros and cons of doing that. And so that can be a good team member to help with a discussion that a management member, if the owner is not the operator, would have a hard time doing, because they're a bit conflicted, or they're just, you know, never been in this situation themselves. So that can be a good reason for the team. So we'll talk about each one of these. So let's talk about this first one first. So getting organized. And you think about, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about, in the structure, a little bit about what we recommend, what I would recommend from how to prepare your company for sale. And then we'll kind of provide some case studies on deals we've done where, you know, preparation maybe wasn't done, and you know, something not great happened. So we'll try to kind of make it more real. But these are some key areas for you to think about, both from a good practices standpoint and a transaction standpoint. But the whole business and organizational structure standpoint, getting all of that in a good place is important. On the HR side, there's some basic blocking and tackling that you should think about. You know, the entire org chart, the employee handbook, all those things that are, you may just not think much about them. Buyers look at those. They look at employee handbooks. They'll say, well, do you really honor those holidays? Well, how does that jive with our organization? Are you compliant with, you know, different regulations? Are we going to have some kind of impact by not, you know, abiding by those rules? But go ahead.
Do you suggest, or do you see companies that might need like a review, not a full audit done by like a CPA firm, but like a review?
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Is that something?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're big fans of accounting firms being engaged, not only in the accounting element kind of year in, year out. You know, we're big fans of audits, and reviews are good too. But a tick above compilations and a way above just internal numbers. You want someone else looking at your books to make sure what you're doing is still good from a GAAP standpoint. GAAP changes, you know. And so you need to kind of think through what that entails. And so we'll talk a lot about things you could do, and we would recommend as kind of the basics to getting ready. But yeah, so absent to this page is all the financial stuff. So, you know, I put that on a separate section because I know my audience. So, yeah. Yes?
Yeah, no gap's the standard, but I've been on the buy side a lot, and so and I see a lot of like cash EBITDA as well, right?
Yep.
kind of both sets of books. Do you recommend, kind of cash and gap, or does it change depending on the transaction?
It matters. It depends on your business. If you're a cash, let's say you focus a lot on bookings and you care about cash in the door to fund kind of the operations of the business. That's good. You should do that. You should have a cash forecast. You should do that. Whatever you need for the business. But everyone should have a gap set of books because that's how you're going to transact. You're going to rep. You're going to make representations that your gap in a purchase agreement, you're going to be held to that standard. And so if you're not gap right now, you should get gap compliant or know your deficiency and be able to quantify it. And we'll talk a lot about the, being non-compliant and the implications of that. But I would say at least both, if not just gap. Yeah. And if you're IFRS, whatever you do. But any other questions on? So let me keep going through some of these. So HR is a big area, though. Making sure that you're providing the right kind of benefits. The whole concept of ERISA and all the employee-related stuff is a big stumbling block for some of our past clients, and I'm sure for you guys too. Working through, no company is without any kind of litigation or anything like that, and so and employee litigation happens, and as hard as you try not for it to happen, it happens, and so being on top of it and you keep track of it and you know where you are on all of it, that's important. Safety, having written policies, all of those things are key, and it's good to have them organized. Legal intellectual. You think about all the stakeholder agreements that are out there. You think about customers, you think about suppliers, you think about employee agreements. All those, you should think about getting them in order. And I'll talk a little bit about a case study of where that wasn't the case and the impact. But also what is often overlooked are related party agreements. So let's say you lease your facility from your mother and you don't have a lease agreement. And you go to sell and there's no arrangement between the two. So how do you, it's something you'll just have to work through. And often you put in place a new lease, and that lease agreement is a 40-page document you're negotiating on behalf of your mother with a buyer. And it's just not a great time to do it because you're negotiating everything else, and you're trying to sell your company, and you're also trying to run the company so you can hit your numbers that you said you would hit to get the valuation you want to get. So it's important to think about all those things in advance. And if you audit yourself now and start getting organized, you can identify those things a lot more simply and do them not over the weekend. And, and you can do them in advance and get them buttoned up. Think about lease agreements, loan documents, license agreements. So if you're borrowing some technology or IP from someone else and you don't have a formal agreement, put that in place. It's only going to benefit you. You may have to change it in a deal, but at least you have some baseline to start from, right? Patents, trademarks, all the other registered IP, make sure that's organized. And to the extent you can use a third party to manage that, they're going to do a better job than you will internally. Not to say you're not great at managing all the IP, but it's often in the bailiwick of someone who does that for a living. They're going to do a much better job. And then insurance. And we at times, depending on the company, suggest you go talk to your insurance broker, routinely and just make sure you're fully covered. You think about the big areas, cyber risk. We sold a company recently in, I think it was April, May of this year, where the buyer still has not announced the deal because they've been hacked so many times when they announce a deal that they don't announce anymore until they've done a full cybersecurity audit of their new portfolio company. It's like every single time they got hacked and they got ransomed and they were just done with it. And so as soon as they are happy with the systems and the protections, they announce their deals. That's good, but you also want to be covered from an insurance perspective. You want to make sure you're covered from a cost perspective. It helps you from your operations standpoint, but it also helps you in a transaction. And then just some of the other stuff. So there's a lot of things you can be doing now. And this would be the bulk of the preparation. And it's, keeping it organized. It's about being proactive on all of these. It's when you hear about a certain relationship with the owners, they did this or that thing. It's about chasing them down and getting it documented and getting it cleaned up. All those things are going to be a pretty busy part of your, prep to get a deal done. So that's, any other questions on this? I'm going to jump to financial fitness here in a second. But let me tell you about a case study about a company that, we'll call it Project Coast. They were a value-added distributor, and they were relatively large, but it was family-owned, and they did not have any agreements with their key salespeople that had managed, millions of dollars worth of business with each one of their key clients. And so they could, what that means is they could essentially move to a competitor, bring their entire book of business, and there was no recourse. So clearly this was identified in diligence as a big risk area. And the buyer said, you got to sign contracts with each one of your key salespeople. We're not doing the deal. So sellers were motivated. They, the salesperson found out about this opportunity and took advantage of it. And so he said, well, I'm not going to sign this until you pay me part of the deal. So he got part of the deal, right? So because he was their top sales guy. He was responsible for 25% of the business, his accounts. There was nothing they could do. But had they just put something in place early when he wasn't that important, and it would have been a much better situation. And so it seems like a little thing, right? Non-compete. But it turned out to be a very big thing for these three brothers who own the company. And it's something, mistake they're not going to repeat. So it's, but some kind of key things to think about, when you're preparing. Your ability to identify showstoppers in a deal increases dramatically if you just get ready. And so these are some of the key learnings of getting prepared. It minimizes any kind of excessive burden during a sale process. A sale process, when you're supporting a transaction, is another full-time job, and you already have a full-time job. And so to add, the due diligence to that can be overwhelming, and so this is a way to minimize that burden. It speeds up a sale process. It shows how organized and credible you are. That credibility only improves if you're organized. So there are things you learn and you're able to get from that preparedness that drives your reputation and the outcome of the deal more so than not being prepared. So that's just kind of one, and we have a lot of different examples where that preparation led to stronger outcomes for the sellers. Any questions? Okay, so let's talk about financial fitness. So these are just some basic areas, and I'm going to go through each one of these right now. But you are directly linked to the financial preparedness of a company. And you know your limitations from a resource standpoint, people standpoint. So you can do whatever you need to, but you can also influence the change to drive better resources. But these are some things that we often see as people just not doing them, and things that could be done much better if and that would translate into a much better outcome. So you just think about the basics, and this may sound silly, but we have clients that don't report monthly. They don't close the books monthly. They don't have a hard close. They don't have timely closes when they do. Oh, these are July, here are May's numbers. It's September, but here are May numbers. And that is common for some of our clients. So they don't have the right systems, If you're still on an AS400, that's probably too old. So there are things that we run into where we recommend an upgrade and all those sorts of things. From a financial statement standpoint, have a financial forecast, have a budget. You'd be surprised at how many people just have never made a budget because the owners just know what they're getting every month and they take their dividends and they don't think about operating the business with some discipline and having a budget and performing against it, right? So that's sounds silly, but the more sophisticated you can be from a forecasting standpoint, the better decisions you can make as an organization. Where should we invest as a company? Well, we know this part of the business drives the best margin. let's invest there, right? It's easy. But to know how you're comping against that budget is a really helpful management tool. But it's also incredibly good from a sale process, because when we're selling a business, the buyer wants to know a couple things. They want to know what the company does and how much money it does doing that. And that's critical. So if you can explain, hey, these are our forecasts, we've been forecasting forever, and we know what we make, and this is what we're going to do, it gives a lot more confidence in the buyer to rely on those numbers and hopefully pay. You have a question? Oh, thanks. Yeah. Pay for that kind of preparedness. I'm going to accelerate this a little bit. So a couple things that tie into that financial forecast is around KPIs. So think about KPIs, are the levers of your business. You want to be able to identify those and track those on a regular basis. Don't have too many. Just keep it simple. What do the ones that really drive the business look like? And track those. That's something you can do right now. Think about the adjustments to the financials. Let's say your owner has a G7. He likes to fly around, and it's on the company. You want to be able to isolate some of those expenditures that aren't necessary to the go-forward business. That goes hand in hand with that diligence focus areas, but personal owner-related investments, those sorts of things. You want to be able to sequester those, and a new buyer may not have the same kind of view on those expenses, and you're going to want to get credit for the addition to profitability to drive a higher outcome in a sale. So you want to identify those. And it's vigilance and tracking those and trying to identify that, and that can take some time. So the more you focus on that now, the better. Diligence focus areas, key areas, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the quality of earnings. Does anyone not know what a quality of earnings is? I can just give a high level. Most people, okay? So quality of earnings is where it's not like an audit. It's really looking at the steady state earnings of a company and adjusting for anything that might impact that. And so that can be improper accruals that aren't hitting the P&L properly. It can be one-time events. You sold some equipment. It's hitting your EBITDA for some reason. They're just simple things that you want to eliminate out, both on the negative and positive side. So you hire a third-party firm, credible, that can give some validation to your earnings profile. And so that's a quality of earnings. And we recommend you engage with someone that does that. And there's some great firms in town that do that. And so we recommend, you recommend that. So those are the key areas. So I'm going to hit a couple of these pretty quickly. So here are 4 different case studies where people were not prepared. And so this is I'm going to call this Project Wild Style, because there were one company, but there were 7 different entities. They were never consolidated, and they were also running some on GAAP, some on cash, and they had different fiscal year ends. What are we doing here? So what that does is that eliminates the ability to manage the business on an aggregate basis, right? It also actually limited the interests of potential buyers because it was such a mess. What do we do here? We can't do any changes until we clean this up. And this deal got done magically, but they're still trying to clean this up, and they're not yet implementing strategic initiatives to grow the company. And it's going to take a little while longer. But it limited the valuation. It limited the buyer pool. Had they had this in order, a lot more people would have gotten involved, and it could have gone for a much higher price. And that's what the buyer is banking on, by the way. They're going to turn this around in a few years, and they're going to get a higher multiple. Project March Madness. So this is a client that had 3 different systems, managing order flow, managing inventory, management fulfillment, all 3 different systems. And then they also decided during the sale process that it was a good time to implement NetSuite. And so they went ahead and did that too without letting us know. And so we were running a process very quickly, and we found out that they're running 2 instances of their financials. Oh, that's QuickBooks, but we just launched with NetSuite, last week. And we're just making sure they're both the same as we keep going here. So he's running 2 sets of books on 2 different accounting systems while selling the company. Not a great move. You know, so pick your battles and kind of adjust your expectations accordingly. And so it's great that he moved to NetSuite. We're big fans of better, more robust accounting systems, but doing it during a sale process is not the right time. Project Tractor, this was a company that ran on just tax books, and every year at the end of the year, this was a dealership, he would write off all his inventory for tax purposes. And so he would give him the next year really nice margin, right? No cost of goods. And it's great. It pushes the tax down the road constantly, right? Because you get this big write-off at the end of the year. I see the cleverness. You're kicking the can down the road. But there was no ability to see, you know, how well he was doing because everything was no-cost inventory. You know, it's, you know, prices. So it was just based on revenue. So it's very hard. So keep some gap books. Tax fraud, maybe? No comment. But I didn't like the approach, and I'm not a big advocate of it. So gap books are better. Project Savant. Yeah, we had a CFO that kept all the numbers in his head. You could ask him anything, and he could tell you. But, you know, make yourself indispensable at your own peril. He had no budget. You know, he was the only one that knew the financials. He didn't need a forecast because he knew what was happening. Oh, he's smart, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. But holy smokes, I mean, he was so critical. We needed him practically in every meeting. And he also had a day job, and he was also getting all the due diligence ready. It was a disaster. So produce good financials. Produce them on a regular basis, and it will make your life better. So that's on the financial side. Do we have 2 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, so any questions on the financial side? So I can go on and on. That you know, the financial fitness is more important than you think, and it's more overlooked than you think in most companies. And you know, it's a great area just to spend time on as a management team, to just see how you're doing, KPIs, you know, ability to just report in a timely fashion. Is it accurate? All that kind of stuff. Last one I want to talk a little bit about is about preparing your team. So that's not only having a good management team. It's knowing the objectives of the owner. What do they want to do in a transaction? It's about aligning the management team with their interests with that of the owner. Often, the management team is not the ownership team, and you want to make sure that they're incented to get a deal done for the owner. So you want to make sure there's alignment there and interest. So you want to think about that too. So preparing the management team both from a workload perspective. You know, sometimes you need to supplement the management team with some outsourced resources, like an Amplio, you know. And so you kind of want to think about selling a company as a second job. So you want to prepare accordingly from a time standpoint. And then having the right kind of, you know, gates in place from a communication standpoint. Are you going to keep it confidential? Are you going to let people know about it? And having, you know, what happens if it leaks, communication plans, those sorts of things. You should get prepared and make sure management understands what's going on before. And then lastly, kind of having the right advisors around you is really important, from the accounting, tax, legal, to wealth management. You know, often an owner has all this money, all his net worth tied up in a business, and it's, you know, they get a check written to them and it's just a pile of money, and they get scared about that. They don't know what to do with it. And so having kind of that wealth management team in place is really, really a good thing to do. And then you kind of, my role is to be a bit of a quarterback between all of those players on the field and drive kind of a successful transaction for the management team and the business owners. And so kind of an M&A advisor is a really good person to have in the mix. So key takeaways, you know, having a successful transaction does not start with the sale process. It's way before. So that's what I wanted to drive home. Hopefully I've been successful in that. But the business doesn't stop when you sell a company. That you continue, you have to perform, so you have to plan accordingly. And you know, transactions are exciting, but they're a lot more fun if you're ready for it. And so I would encourage you guys to take the time in advance to get your companies and kind of your act in order before you pursue some extracurricular activities, so like a sale. But I'll stop there. If there are any questions, I know I rushed at the end there, but happy to take any other questions.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
What's the difference in your experience, prepared, not prepared, in terms of timeline, ultimate multiple or value? You know, those things are really differentiators in doing
Yep.
a deal. Like how are those impacted between being prepared and not prepared?
Yeah, it's a good. So if we're running a sale process, that typically takes around 6 months. If you're not prepared, that can be a year. You know, if we have to stop and someone has to reconstitute financials to have GAAP financials in the middle of the diligence process, that diligence process goes from a 90-day window to a 120-day plus window pretty quickly, maybe 180-day. So it starts dragging out because a lot needs to happen. So that's on the timing, it's extended. Or if it's not extended and you maintain that timeline, you sacrifice a few things like value. So you're going to see a lower valuation in order to get a deal done and let the buyer take on more risk of not being prepared. Okay? And then, so on the valuation, that's hand in hand. It kind of reduces that. You're going to have to trade off your, your credibility for a lower valuation to get a deal done. That's in my experience. But I can't give you, hey, it's 2 turns lower in your multiple, but it is a material element that you can kind of see post. For instance, in the 7 entity example, had they been consolidated, we probably would have had, 5 or 6 more offers that were quite a bit more credible at a valuation that would have been compelling. And we could have driven that up quite a bit in that competitive environment, but we didn't have it. And so we just had to do a deal with the groups that were willing to take on that complexity. So good question. Anything else? Well, if you have any questions or want a copy of this, come see me. But excited. Thanks for letting me share some thoughts with you.